Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're tackling a really important and complex topic that's been gaining a lot of attention lately. The state of relations between Indigenous peoples and the Canadian government. It feels like just a few years ago, there was this wave of optimism, a real sense that things were finally moving in the right direction. But as we look at the landscape in 2025, many are saying that progress has not only stalled, but might actually be reversing. So, what's really going on? Let's break it down together. To understand where we are now, we have to look back. The early 2020s were marked by significant moments. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action, released years earlier, were finally gaining mainstream traction. We saw commitments to clean drinking water, apologies for historical wrongs, and the establishment of a National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. It felt like a national awakening, a promise of a new era built on respect and partnership. There was a genuine belief that Canada was ready to confront its colonial past and build a better future. But promises are one thing, and follow-through is another. So, what changed? One of the biggest factors is what many are calling reconciliation fatigue. After the initial surge of public support and media attention, the momentum began to wane. The issues at hand, land rights, self-governance, systemic inequality are incredibly complex and require sustained, long-term commitment. For the average Canadian, it's easy to get distracted by other pressing concerns like the economy or healthcare. This dip in public pressure has, unfortunately, allowed political will to weaken. When the spotlight moves away, it becomes easier for governments to delay action and revert to old patterns. A major point of contention has been the implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, or UNDRIP. Canada passed legislation to align its laws with UNDRIP, which was hailed as a landmark achievement. However, the on-the-ground reality has been fraught with challenges. A key principle of UNDRIP is free, prior, and informed consent, often shortened to FPIC. This means Indigenous communities must give their consent before projects like pipelines or mines are approved on their traditional territories. In practice, we're seeing this principle tested and, in many cases, ignored. There's a fundamental disagreement over what consent actually means. Does it mean a veto, or does it just mean consultation before the government makes the final decision anyway? We've seen several high-profile resource projects move forward despite strong opposition from First Nations, leading to blockades, legal battles, and a profound sense of betrayal. It sends a message that when economic interests clash with Indigenous rights, the economy often wins. This has severely eroded trust, making it seem like the government's commitment to UNDRIP was more symbolic than substantive. Another critical area is the ongoing failure to fully address the 94 calls to action. While there's been progress on some, many of the most crucial and difficult calls remain unfulfilled. Let's take the justice system, for example. Indigenous people are still vastly overrepresented in Canadian prisons. Calls to address systemic racism in policing and the courts have been met with resistance and slow, incremental changes. Similarly, the child welfare crisis, where Indigenous children are taken from their families at staggering rates, continues. Bill C-92 was passed to give Indigenous communities jurisdiction over their own child and family services. But the rollout has been hampered by underfunding and jurisdictional disputes with provinces. For families and communities living this reality every day, it feels like the system is designed to fail them, and that's a heartbreaking and infuriating position to be in. Land rights and self-governance are at the absolute core of this issue. For decades, First Nations have been locked in slow, expensive, and often adversarial negotiations with the federal government to settle land claims and implement treaties. This process, known as the Comprehensive Land Claims Policy, has been widely criticized as a modern tool of extinguishment, forcing nations to give up their Aboriginal title in exchange for a limited package of land and money. The pace is glacial. Some nations have been at the negotiating table for longer than many of us have been alive. This endless bureaucracy drains resources and morale, and it reinforces a power imbalance where the government holds all the cards. The frustration is boiling over, with more communities turning to direct action and court challenges because the negotiation table feels like a dead end. Economic reconciliation is another area where promises have fallen short. The idea is to create opportunities for Indigenous communities to build wealth and participate fully in the Canadian economy on their own terms. We've heard a lot of talk about procurement policies and partnerships. However, many Indigenous leaders point out that they are still being offered a small piece of the pie, often in the form of benefit agreements for projects they don't even support. True economic reconciliation isn't about a few jobs or contracts. It's about recognizing Indigenous peoples as rights holders and decision makers, as partners with an equal say in the development of their own lands and resources. Without that fundamental shift, it just feels like a new form of economic colonialism. All of this is happening against a backdrop of political polarization. The spirit of cross-party cooperation on Indigenous issues seems to have faded. Debates have become more divisive, with some politicians framing Indigenous rights as a threat to national unity or economic prosperity. This kind of rhetoric is incredibly damaging. It creates an us versus them mentality and gives people permission to dismiss Indigenous concerns. It undoes years of work aimed at educating Canadians and building bridges of understanding. When political leaders use these issues to score points, it poisons the well for any real, meaningful dialogue. The feeling on the ground in many Indigenous communities is one of deep disappointment and exhaustion. They've heard the apologies, they've seen the reports, they've participated in countless consultations, and yet the fundamental relationship of colonial control often feels unchanged. Young people in particular are growing up seeing these broken promises, and they are less willing to wait patiently for a system that has consistently failed their parents and grandparents. There is a rising tide of activism that is more assertive, more sophisticated in its use of legal and political tools, and less willing to compromise on inherent rights. So, where do we go from here? It's easy to feel pessimistic, but it's crucial we don't give up. The path forward requires a genuine structural shift. First, free, prior, and informed consent needs to be treated as the standard, not an obstacle to be overcome. This means respecting a no and co-designing projects from the very beginning, not just consulting at the end. Second, the government must move away from the slow, adversarial land claims process and towards a model that truly recognizes and affirms Aboriginal title and rights. This involves creating new, flexible mechanisms for negotiating and implementing self-governance. Third, funding is not optional. The chronic underfunding of essential services like housing, healthcare, and education in Indigenous communities is a national disgrace. Achieving parity requires a massive, sustained investment, not just piecemeal announcements. And finally, for non-Indigenous Canadians, our job is to stay engaged. We need to keep the pressure on our elected officials. We need to educate ourselves, listen to Indigenous voices, and challenge misinformation and prejudice when we see it. Reconciliation isn't a spectator sport. It requires active participation from all of us. The relationship between Indigenous peoples and the Canadian state is at a critical juncture. The optimism of a few years ago has given way to a stark reality check. Regaining that lost trust will be incredibly difficult, and it will require more than just words. It will require bold action, a willingness to relinquish control, and a genuine commitment to building a new nation-to-nation relationship based on justice, respect, and the recognition of rights. The work is hard, but it is essential for the future of everyone who calls this land home. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more deep dives into important Canadian issues. And please, share your thoughts in the comments below. But let's keep the conversation respectful. Thanks for watching.